Welcome to Live from My Drum Room. My guest today is Rob Cook, who is the publisher, author, owner, and founder of Rebeats. And he's authored and published several best selling vintage drum books, one of which is one of my favorites right here, the Gretch drum book. And Rob is also the founder and producer of the Chicago Drum Show, the oldest and largest vintage and custom drum show in the United States, possibly in the world. So I'm excited to have Rob here with me today, and we're going to talk about his Rebeats publishing business and also the Chicago Drum Show and give us a little sneak preview of what's in store this year. So thanks for checking in, and welcome to Live from My Drum Room. Good afternoon, Rob. Welcome to the show.
Hey, John, I appreciate the opportunity. Congratulations. I love what you've been doing, man. A little bit in awe. Talk about being in good company. You've been doing some amazing things. It's been really enjoying your podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Coming from you, that means so much to me. Thank you so much, Rob. I appreciate it. You are a pillar in the drum community, and it's an honor to have you here today, sir. And again, thank you for those kind words. And man, I hope people know what you do for the drum community. Besides the incredible Chicago Drum Show, which I've only had the honor and pleasure of attending one time, but I told you that after that first time I was hooked. And that was in 2019. We know what happened a year after that, unfortunately, but I'm going to make it back. The only thing I would request, it's a small request from you, Rob, just a tiny request. If you can change the weekend to any other weekend.
That's a tough one, man. It's always the week between Mother's Day and Memorial Day. And I had it a week earlier one year, and that was on Mother's Day. And I had a lot of people coming up and saying, man, I'm here now, but if you do this again, forget it. Next year,
Yeah.
next year I've got to be home on Mother's Day.
I get it. No, I remember you telling me that story, and yeah, you'd have a lot of people sleeping on your couch.
Yeah.
If you did that. I get it. I think I told you my granddaughter's since 2019, her maybe even the year before that, she does a dance recital on that same weekend, and this year she's doing two recitals on the Saturday. So can't miss that.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
I'll get back there.
I hear the story a lot of graduations is another big thing. High school graduations, college graduations, weddings. I remember one year, the chief called me, Bill Ludwig II, and he loved coming to the show, and we loved having him. We always had a recording of Hail to the Chief, and we played it when he first walked in, and he just would soak it up and walk down the aisle waving like he was the president. And the last time that he was able to make it, he was wheelchair bound, and a little tear down his face as they wheeled him down the aisle to Hail to the Chief. But anyhow, he called me one year and said, man, just so you know, I just had to cancel my attendance at a wedding to come to the drum show. And it was Jim Catalano's son that was getting married in Elkhart.
Oh.
So I felt a little bad for Jim, but I was glad the chief was going to make it to the show.
Jim probably, even though I don't want to speak for Jim, but he was probably so happy about his son getting married, but at the same time going, man, I'm missing the show.
Yeah.
I know he's a stalwart, a veteran of the show, and what an amazing job. And it's over 30 years, right? Is it 32?
Yep, this is the 32nd and 33
32nd.
years because of 2020. So we had to delay the 30th by 1 year. But yeah, this will be the 32nd.
And does it continue to just grow every year? Has it,
It sort of was up until 2019. And it was incremental. It was pretty small, the gains, but there was always a handful more exhibitors and a few more at the door, and we leveled off a little bit. The growth slowed in the late teens, but it was still continuing to grow. But then of course 2020, there was no show. The 30th was delayed, and in 2021 it was about 50% of what it had been in 2019, both in terms of the number of exhibitors and the door. And everybody was, you know, apprehensive, not sure what was going to happen. The vaccine wasn't really in high gear by then, and people's comfort level and so on. So we had a lot of the PPE on hand, and the plexiglass shields and masks and everything, and we got through. But last year was more like 3/4 of what it used to be. So we're on track to get into a real strong showing again.
I would bet you, I don't know what the numbers look like right now for you. You know, I know it's still almost 2 months from now, but it just seems like the enthusiasm and you know, for all these types of things is back stronger than ever. And this show, I know there's a, you know, I'm giving a shout out to the folks at Drum Forum. A lot of your supporters, you know, are part of this organization, the Drum Forum, and there's lots of chatter about it all the time. And so
That
I think it's
all
going to be,
helps too. I think there's probably a fair number of people, exhibitors and attendees, that get more excited when they see more excitement about it. Now that the
yeah,
posters are out, and we've got the whole clinician schedule, and there's a pretty significant raffle inclusion already. And geez, I picked up about 3 or 4 exhibitors in the last 7 days, and it seems really last minute to me. It's still 8 weeks away, but really we start in like September, letting people reserve their space, the same space they had the previous year. And
yeah,
so it seems kind of last minute to me now. But and then for some of them, it's just the wheels of commerce moving slowly. I thought maybe Yamaha was going to be out of the picture altogether, but I just heard from Jim Haler a couple days ago, and he was introducing the guy that's going to be taking his place with Yamaha, and mentioned that they also have a new marketing and sales manager. So I think that's why they didn't get a hold of me sooner, but we're glad to
I
have
see.
Yamaha back. And in
Right, yeah,
general, a lot of the unknowns are still the corporations. I mean, I'm sure you saw it, and a lot of your friends and former friends, I'm sure, that got displaced because there was a lot of personnel shuffling, and a lot of
yeah.
the corporate percussion entities didn't come out of 2020 looking anything like they did going in.
Yeah, that's for sure. And yeah, and I wonder too if there was maybe for some people still a little bit of a wait and see how things look sort of thing. But like you
Mhm.
say, you kind of can't wait too long because when you're dealing with space and you know, first come first serve and all that sort of thing, then but nice to hear Yamaha's, you know, in there this year. And just looking when you mentioned clinics, I thought I'd just put up the schedule just quickly here, and we'll come back to it as well. But man, what a strong schedule you have, and clinic roster. And I love the and I pardon me for talking so much because I this is your show, so I want you to talk. But I love the idea of having Meet the Smiths, and you've got all these, you know, highly acclaimed cymbal makers all in one place, which is fantastic.
If I can bend your ear on that just a little bit,
Sure.
uh, that it kind of exploded on me. I'm actually I've been working for a number of years on a cymbal book, and it's a topic that's so big and so challenging that I'm half afraid of it. But it's been 40 years since Hugo did his great book, The Cymbal Book, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of updating that needs to be done. And I'm not going to reinvent the wheel, and I'm just going to refer people to Hugo's book in many areas. But the number of companies that's out there has changed markedly. The whole landscape has changed. And around the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a forum called Cymbalholics. Did you ever visit that, or
I did. Yeah, I was a member
Okay,
for a
well,
while on that.
Mike
Yeah.
Skiba, I think, was one of the main guys there. I don't know if he was the moderator, but uh, there was kind of a handful of guys and one female, Heather Stein, but and Spitz-Aquino was a big inspiration for a lot of these guys, but they were cymbal smiths. They weren't they didn't have foundries, they weren't casting, but they were getting blanks and creating cymbals. And in the last decade now, there's a whole new wave of cymbal smiths that were inspired by those guys. The Cymbalholics forum has been gone for quite some time now, and several of those key individuals like Mike Skiba and Spitz-Aquino are no longer with us. But I started realizing, when I started really paying attention and trying to keep a list of all these cymbal companies and cymbal smiths, that it's a real community. They're working together. They also have certain things in common. They see cymbals as organic items. I mean, bronze, the copper and tin never really melds, and it's always going to be gradually trying to get back to its natural state. But that's something that all these guys have in common, is other than being drawn to working with bronze and making musical instruments. And I'm not sure what draws people to it, but it's undeniable. And that there's a brotherhood. They help each other, and they interview each other. They write articles about each other, and help each other. They're even the one guy from the UK, Collingwood, even has a little series of seminars, instructive seminars and so on, to help the other cymbal smiths. So my brainstorm was, okay, I'm going to write to a bunch of these guys, and if I can get 2 or 3 of them to come to the show, we'll have a little panel discussion and so on. Well, all 8 of them that I wrote to took me up on it, and 7 of the 8 even are going to have exhibit spaces. And
Wow.
when I got all those confirmations, I thought, well, I've got to reformat the program here, and we have to make a big deal out of this. So all 8 of them are going to have half an hour each on the clinic stage, and they'll be able to explain how they differ, because their goals are different, the size of their operation is different, but there's a few others. I wasn't able to get everybody in, but man, these are 8 of the big names in this. And
Yeah.
if anybody is inclined to learn a little bit more, if they just go down this list and Google each guy, you're going to be blown away. Ray Byrne has been exhibiting at the show for some time. He probably qualifies as one of that first generation of independent cymbal smiths. He's been at it for a while. Dave Collingwood from the UK, again, he's doing a lot of training and so on, and also makes cymbals. Burke Doherty not only makes his own cymbals, but distributes cymbals for a lot of these other guys through his business, Bronze Pie. Paul Francis, you probably know from your days at Zildjian. And
I never heard of him.
He's just starting a new company together with Sarah. I'm not sure if he's going to still keep on with the Cymbal Craftsman. That's something I need to talk to him about. But we're really excited to have Paul on board. Mike Mangiello, Nikki Moon, Matt Nolan from the UK. Matt is one of the few to have a tempering oven. When these guys get blanks and start making them into a cymbal by hammering and lathing and everything, that kind of has to be done within a certain time frame of when the actual casting was made. Matt is one of the few that actually has a tempering oven, so he can kind of extend the clock on that. And then Timothy Roberts. So it's an amazing group, and each will have a chance to talk about what they're doing, and then there will be a group reception. Steve Maxwell from Maxwell Drums is going to be hosting a kind of a reception where all 8 of them will be together, so you can get your picture taken and talk to the various guys and so on. So I'm really excited about the whole cymbal program.
That's so great. And you know, I mean, good for you for extending that invitation to all those great cymbal makers and them taking you up, and for Steve for, you know, always having the foresight to you know, I know Steve was a big part of, I was only kidding when I said I never heard of Paul Francis, of course. And, you know, Steve was a big part of helping Paul get started, and Paul talked about that on my podcast a little while back. And I think that's fantastic. And I just a little, I certainly don't want to speak for Paul. I know of all these great cymbal makers, but Paul, of course, I know very well for many years, and I'm fairly certain that he's going to continue Cymbal Craftsman, the Cymbal Craftsman brand, in addition to their Royal cymbal, him and Sarah Hagen and Jeff, you know, their business. But just talking about Paul, a little full disclosure, I paid a visit to this young cymbal maker just a couple of days ago. He lives just about 30 miles away, and he was nice enough to do a little modification on a couple of cymbals that I needed some work done on. So so we'd been trying to, I'm just showing this now. I didn't even really plan to do this, but I thought this would be a good time to show this. That's him in his, and I sure hope he doesn't mind me showing this, but that's him in his workshop. He's hand hammering it, and a mirror, a 1980 Zildjian mirror that I bought that was warped and really in tough shape. And Paul, right before my eyes, brought it back to life.
Wow.
I mean, he still has it. He wants to keep working on it a little bit, but just in the time that I was there, he managed to, you know, get it flat, get it straight, and then fix the cup that somebody tried to hand hammer themselves and ruined. And it's, you know, Rob, it's a cheap cymbal. I just bought it on a whim just to get this little piece of history, and you know, Paul took it upon himself to try to bring it back to life. So
wow, that's what really amazes me. And again, it's something that all of these guys have in common, is that what they can do with the hammer, and the mistakes they can even make. Every single one of the guys that I've heard being interviewed or that I've spoken to have made mistakes along the way. One hammer strike in the wrong place, and you can destroy not only that piece of metal in terms of its use as a cymbal, but forget about the project you were working towards. It's all out the window. And these guys have all thrown away many plates on their way to becoming a fairly successful cymbal maker, and they're able to get to a point where they've talked to their customer, or they're talked to themselves, and they've got this inner voice, and they know what they're going for. They know what this piece of metal can do, and they know how to get it there with hammer strikes in the right place and the right number. It just amazes me.
Yeah, it really, and to your point too, and I know this from working in that business, that, you know, when you're an independent cymbal maker like Paul or any of the other 7 independents, you know, your yield is so important, because it's just, you know, if it takes you 5 cymbals to make one that you can sell, you're going to have a tough go at really making that business work. So the idea is that you learn from your experience on how to get the best yield from, you know, each blank that you work with. You can turn into a great sounding instrument and turn that into, you know, a sale ultimately.
And sometimes they follow the metal. That's another thing that intrigues me. It's not like they've got a pile of blanks and they've got a sound in their head, so they can walk over, get out a blank, and work towards what they had in their head and get there. They can do that sometimes, but other times they're not quite sure what's going to happen with a piece of metal until they get into it. And as they're working it, as they're hammering and they're lathing, its personality starts coming out, and they go hand in hand. They help that piece of metal along. I'm just in awe of these guys.
Yeah, no, me too. It's an amazing, you know, art. I guess, you know, art that these guys can have
Yeah.
mastered. It's pretty amazing.
One
Um,
Spizzacchino story, a little bit off the track, but
yeah, yeah.
it comes to the front of my mind when I get into that kind of dialogue. I saw some at a Frankfurt fair. Roberto was there. He used to make a bunch of cymbals that he'd take them to Frankfurt, sell them out there, and that was it. It wasn't like he had a company or a catalog or price list or anything. He was an independent craftsman. So I ran into him at a Frankfurt show, and I was looking over all this stuff, and I said, man, these hi-hats, these do it for me. I got to get a pair of these hi. Can I get these? Oh, everything in the booth is sold, he says, but I can make you a pair. And I said, but yeah, if you make a pair, are they going to be like, I said, exactly. I can make that same pair of cymbals for you. And it took a couple of years. And I think it was actually somebody else that went to Frankfurt when a year I wasn't going that had to get them from him and hand them off. But they were the cymbals I was looking for and that I had heard,
That's
and he was able to
man.
recreate it. And Spiz really stands out as uh, head and shoulders above of the crowd. Almost all of these guys speak in awe of him, and that the prices that his cymbals currently bring kind of speak to that.
Absolutely. I had the honor of meeting him several times at Frankfurt, and the first time I remember, being in awe of him. He was so unassuming, as you know,
Yeah,
so uh, humble. I would say quiet, and but yeah, I feel like I went over to see Ron Donette at his booth or something, and I think he was at Ron's booth, and I don't know that I even would have recognized him. Either Ron introduced us, or maybe I realized who he was, and yeah, just what a true master.
yeah.
Yeah, boy, just
And a pure artist. He just
yeah,
wasn't that interested in the business side of it. I mean, you got to have a certain interest in it to survive, obviously. And he did approach it in a business-like manner. But he left a lot of the distribution to other people and so on. But the the pure artistry of the man really came out. I visited him at his workshop, and he had made a stave construction olive wood snare drum, and it sounded pretty good. It looked kind of neat, and the counter hoops were like wrought iron, and it had aftermarket tube lugs that were made out of brass, and kind of an inexpensive chrome, looked like just a no-name strainer on it. And I was thinking to myself as I looked at it, well, it's not quite done. I wonder if he's going to plate everything. So it's all, and I asked him about that. I said, are you going to finish all this off? And he looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language that he couldn't understand. And I repeated it a couple of times. And then he said, no, you don't understand. This is what I wanted to make. This is what I made. Here it is. And this was how his artistic vision. He accomplished it, and that was what he meant to do. And
yeah.
then I was kind of stunned and embarrassed that I didn't appreciate that sooner. He'd made 3 of those all together, and at one time he was keeping one in the family, and Johnny Craviotto had one, and I had the third. And a few years ago, I let that go to Lee Ruff, who has a big collection of Spizzacchino snare drums, some of the other
Wow.
models that are even rarer. And he used to distribute Roberto's cymbals in the United States for him. So it was a fitting place to let that one go to.
I didn't know that. I've never met Lee. I don't believe I have, but at your show 4 years ago, um, I through speaking with Steve Maxwell at dinner, I mentioned I was looking for a gold-plated 24 karat Gretch snare drum, one of their famous. And Steve said to me, Lee Ruff has one. I believe he was selling it at the show today. I didn't see it there. And that was on the Saturday night, and I had to leave early Sunday morning to get back home. And so Steve, excuse me, acted as the liaison between me and Lee, and I ended up, it's sitting here on my shelf just a few
Ah,
feet away,
ah,
that beautiful Gretsch gold snare
ah.
drum. So if Lee happens to see this, thank you very much. I love the drum. 4 years later, it's looking a little bit tarnished, but it's a dream come true to own that drum. In fact, I'm going to show you real quick because it's too close not to
Oh,
hold this
yeah,
up.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah. And I'll tell you, Rob, when it was delivered to my house, it looked it had
Wow.
recently been replated. It looked like it had just been made.
Wow.
It's just phenomenal. Um,
I
even has a
I've
gold.
never been that much of a Gretsch guy compared to the my experience and depth of knowledge and so on with Ludwig and Slingerland. But and the Gretsch book would have been a huge challenge without the help of Lee Ruff and John Sheridan. And John
Yeah.
Sheridan's Christmas card every year has that drum on the front of the card.
Well, the book. And speaking of the book, it's a for anyone, any Gretsch fans, or even if you're not a Gretsch fan, just a vintage drum fan. It's a great book that Rob put together. And I don't know when you published this, Rob. I know it's been around for a while, but
Yeah, I'd have to look. Has it been 10 years now? It may have been out a decade ago. That's,
2013.
yeah.
You are right,
Yeah.
sir. Yeah. Yep. It's fantastic. It's just chock full of
John,
Gretsch history.
John and I had been working on it for quite a while before that, and in a really weird series of coincidental events, it was delayed for a while when his lovely wife Andrea had a terrible accident and hit her head in Manhattan going to work and suffered a brain injury. So,
Oh,
and then like 4 years later, my wife had a brain tumor. And so it was delayed for 5 years each for two different brain injuries to our wives, but we
oh
finally got it
boy.
together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. You have to look at what the priorities in life are. So
Yeah.
absolutely. And while we're on the subject, I just realized people probably would wonder what it sounds like. I don't know how it's going to sound. I mean, it sounds like a Gretsch chrome over brass snare drum, which I love. And it has the 42 snares, gold on the bottom. Yeah, beautiful. So,
Yeah, great drum.
how far along are you on this cymbal book you were talking about?
Oh, not too far. I got kind of an outline. In fact, last year's Chicago Drum Show program had about a 4-page cymbal history dash article that serves as kind of an outline. The main things I want to do are kind of profile all of the active cymbal companies and Smiths as of a certain day. I mean, that list changes every day, so it's hard to nail down. And so I've got the list kind of together. I need to flesh it out by getting information from each, and there's almost 100 on the list now. But so there's about 3 goals. One goal is to shine a light on the existing state of the art and who all's doing it and what they're doing. One is actually to readdress the Zildjian narrative in another way and try to bring a little more clarity to it. And that's largely at the urging of Fred Gretch. And Fred's family has a long and storied history with the Zildjian. And in fact, in the United States, the Gretch story predates the Zildjian story, and which ended up leading to a lot of litigation. So we're gonna try to do that. And Fred used to try to talk me into exposing the whole, not exposing, but clarifying the whole story and explaining all the litigation. And I'd look at him and say, that's a good way to make everybody in the cymbal world hate me. There's no way that you're going to tell that narrative without aggravating some people. And especially my good friends Armand and Bob, who had helped me with numerous projects. They always had great stories about George Way and about Ludwig back in the day and so on. And I didn't want to do anything to turn the waters up, make waves for anybody.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think the time has come to go ahead and try to tell the story as best I can and straighten out the narrative a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's going to be another big aim of the book. I'm probably thinking another year and a half at least before I get much beyond an outline stage and research stage.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand. And you're very thorough, I know, in your work. So yeah. And to your point too, there's been probably a lot of clarification in the years that have since the last book, since Hugo's book. So the information's kind of out there, for you to then clarify, if that makes sense. Like you wouldn't be betraying Armin and Bob, because I think a lot of this information, and I think you could then put a finer point on it with your
Mhm.
expertise and knowledge
Yeah, and we can
and
talk with a
resources.
little more openness now about the actual process. So like I said, most of these cymbal smiths are not running foundries, but man, is
Right.
that a critical part of it. And it's not just for a long time, the narrative kind of seemed to be that there's this sealed room and the male Zildjian relative goes into there and secretly mixes the formula. And that's kind of correct, but there's so
Mhm.
much more to it. You don't just, any metallurgist can examine a cymbal and say, yeah, it's 80-20. All you got to do is
Right.
mix bronze and copper, and there you go. But the real secret is not that it's 80-20, but exactly when you put how much of what in. And
Right.
once you cast it, what do you do then? How do you cool it? How do you temper it? How do you anneal it? And how many times through the roller do you go? That's all before it gets into a plate that goes out to these guys who can then hammer and lathe it into a shape and
Right.
tensile state.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, I used to say the same thing to people, that it's anyone could easily, and when I was with Zildjian and the people at Sabian, would say 80% copper, 20% tin. So there was no secret to what the metal composition was. It was, like you just said, it's what you do with it, the little traces of silver. And what Armin used to say is the magic is how you could put these metals together with that much tin without it being so fragile that it would
Yeah,
just shatter as soon as you hit it.
yeah, and the exact rate of cooling, how you cool it, whether you use water or not, and what kind of, is it salt water? Is it because of the atmospheric conditions and you're near the sea? There's a lot of
Yeah.
moving parts there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have to say, Armin, oh man, I miss that guy every day, and he would have loved. I don't think he would have ever made it to the show, to the Chicago show. I mean, I don't think he did. He passed away 10 years into after you started it, but he would have loved to go to when you mentioned the chief loving, going every year. The Armin was in his element when he was in a situation like that. Like he loved PASIC. He loved going to the jazz show, IAJE, for the music. But,
Mhm.
NAMM tended to be a little overwhelming for him, but he loved being around drummers.
Yeah,
And he
yeah,
would have totally dug it, especially all the vintage stuff. And,
yeah.
uh, you know, uh, yeah,
I didn't know him nearly as well as I knew Robert, but he was always so patient. I usually had questions for him, and usually about George Way or something of the era that George was active in that Armin would know about. And he was always, of course, busy talking to somebody, and usually, star endorsers and so on, and owners of big drum shops. And I just kind of stand back, but we'd make eye contact and he'd know I was kind of standing by. And then finally, just wait until he had a bit of a gap and he'd come over to chat with me. And he was just so relaxed. And he'd just light up when he'd start talking about these memories from the 50s and 60s, and
Yeah.
he was like a favorite uncle the first time you meet him, you know.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's a perfect description. You know, he really was. He was you know, all the things that people say about him, you know, he really was all that. You know, he was just a you know, I mean, people person is an understatement. He really knew how to just um you know, react and be around
Yeah,
people. He was
yeah,
just so comfortable with it.
yeah.
I wanted to put this up again real quick, Rob, because I think this is the one that well, somewhere when I was looking at this earlier, I saw, yes, I think this is amazing right here. And I think you deserve so much credit. And $20 admission, I think and ages kids from 5 to 12, $10. I think that's so fantastic that you keep the price of this so affordable for people at a time when, you know, that's so key for everybody. And so I just want to commend you for that. It sort of was lost on me, and I was looking at this today, and I was showing my wife, and I said, "This is so great that you can still go to an event like this for $20. It's
Yeah,
amazing."
well, thank you. I appreciate it. It was $10 for quite a while, and then 15 for a few years, and yeah, I can't see it ever going over 20. It needs to stay affordable. And while we're right there, the other people on the program, let's go over real quick. In addition to
Sure.
the
Yeah.
cymbal
Absolutely.
smiths, and actually just before the cymbal smiths, the very first clinic is going to be Eric Binder, and Eric is going to talk about old K's and show some of his and explain, you know, for people that are wondering why an old K ride is $2,000 and are they all worth that or 3,000 or whatever. And so he's going to show some of his old Ks and some of the new custom Binder series cymbals from Mike Mangiello, and kind of talk to the people about how to talk to a cymbal smith, like the how to describe the sound that you're looking for. What's
Great.
the attack? What's the roar? What's the stick sound? Blah blah blah. So Eric's going to kick it off. Or actually just before him, Rami Antun from A&F Drum Company is going to do a brief presentation on the making of the world's largest bass drum that he recently did to take the place of Big Bertha at the University of Texas. So now there's a Big Bertha too, and it's pretty amazing the state of the art of the cart for it and the drum itself. I'm looking forward to seeing how it
Wow.
happened. He may even have
Yeah.
some snippets of video from a documentary that's being made about the making of the drone, but
What's the actual size, Rob, of the bass drum?
I don't know off the top of my head. And
Maybe it's I'm sure it's on the, yeah, available somewhere.
it's
Yeah.
probably at his website.
Yeah.
You know, for a long time, people wouldn't talk about the size. Purdue and the Purdue drum, we've had at the show twice, and then there's Big Bertha. And for a long time, both drums were known as the world's largest bass drum. And neither school was really interested in comparing measurements. And actually, one was a little bit larger in radius, but the other one was a little bit deeper. So I don't know if you'd have to count the cubic feet to, but at any rate, the new drum, Rami's drum,
Yeah.
hands down bigger than both of those drums. Uh, but
Man.
so, and right next to him, Jeff Davenport from the UK.
Good old
He
Jeff.
comes
Yeah.
with the help of Remo. Man, I learned something every time I talk to the guy. He's a lot of fun. He's helped me with a lot of research on it. Numerous different kinds of projects that Jeff is always there to talk about drum tuning primarily and different tensioning systems and so on. So we're glad to have Jeff back with Remo's help and support.
Great.
And
Yeah.
then right above him is the Eric Binder. Gary Astridge is going to be back. He's always tremendously popular, brings a big crowd to his presentation on Ringo's drums. And he's even bringing this year the big sculpture. It's 8 feet, 200 pounds of the peace sign, a big fiberglass.
Oh.
So it'll be a great photo op. Everybody, it'll be near the entrance and people can get their picture taken with their their best friend or their drum hero or whatever standing by the big peace sign.
That's great. Gary's great, man. He's yeah.
And then Paul Wertico and Bobby T. That's going to
Yep.
be fun. Paul is so laid back and easy to get along with. What a great guy. He one year did a clinic. He came in as he was buying his wristband. I mean, he's not one of these guys that comes in expecting a free ride. I've always got a pass for him, but usually he pays before I can even get over there with it. But I said, oh, Paul, I almost called you. We had a last minute change in the clinic schedule and the guy couldn't make it. And he said, well, when is it? And I said, well, it's about an hour and a half. He said, well, I'll do it. I mean,
Oh,
and he went out and scrounged around on the exhibit floor and found some drums to play and a set of cymbals and went ahead and did the clinic with an hour and a half notice. Just amazing. And he's been a big supporter of the show for years. So we're delighted to have him back.
what a great drummer too, and a great educator. Yeah.
And Bobby T, man, I heard a lot of his playing. B3 had his WFL3 drum company right there near the registration table. So I heard a lot of Bobby T at last year's show, and man, he's got some chops. So,
Yeah.
and a great resume. So we're looking forward to kicking out some jams with Bobby on the clinic stage.
Great.
Jerry Brown, that's going to be a great one.
Oh yeah.
Courtesy of actually an electronic drum company, they will.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
looking forward to having Jerry there. Scott Pellegrom isn't as much of a household name as a lot of these guys, but boy, is he a rising star. And I first met him just a few weeks ago. He did a little clinic in Lansing here where I live. And I was pretty much blown away. And then I find out he's actually a superstar already on Instagram. He's much hipper to social media than I am, and it's been paying off for him. But man, he just does some amazing things. He reminds me of a cross between Jojo Mayer and oh gosh, who else does the little Johnny Rab, with
Johnny Rab,
stick
yeah.
tricks and sounds, and he approaches his instrument with a great passion and curiosity and very non-standard ways of getting remarkable sounds. So I'm really looking forward to having him be a part of the show. I'm sure he'll be back again as long as if his schedule permits.
Fantastic. What a
So
great
it's
lineup.
a pretty neat agenda. I traditionally have only done like 3 clinics a day over the weekend, and we have some space in between for a changeover and let people go to the exhibits. And boy, the way it just kind of exploded on me this year, we're pretty much back to back for 2 days in the clinic room. So we're going to be busy.
I was going to say, and I'll let you speak to this, but some really great news that we all got recently, which is our friend Dom Famularo is making a great recovery, and
Yeah.
I know he'll be at NAMM in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And he's coming to the Chicago Drum Show.
Yeah, I had invited him last summer, I think it was, and to do a clinic, and he said, well, it depends on how things go in the fall. I've got a lot of treatments coming up and so on. And I shot him a couple more messages in maybe October, maybe even December, and I didn't hear anything back. Oh, that's not a good sign. But I just heard from him a couple of weeks ago, and he said, oh yeah, I came across some of our earlier back and forth, and I want to let you know that I've been declared cancer-free. I'm out there. I'm doing a seminar at NAMM, and I'm up for the show. And the clinic program was already pretty much set, just back to back. But I thought, well, we got to have down there. I mean, he, if nothing else, just walking around the hall, it's like igniting fumes or something. There's just an excitement that he brings to drumming almost any room that he goes into. He's just such a nice guy. We did have him do a clinic, I think it was about 4 years ago, and everybody loved him. So I said, well, geez, we'll bring you in, but I don't have a regular clinic. So I'll do whatever you want. So he's going to hang out at the Mafex booth, and he's going to do a little MC work for us over on the clinic stage, and the rest of the time he'll just be Dom, going around talking to people and getting people fired up, you know.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sorry I'll miss that. And I've been staying in touch with Dom as well, and I send him a text and I get the thumbs up, or the heart emoji.
Yeah,
And my wife Kelly is very close with Dom from all the years working for Dad's company. So we were so happy to hear that he has had this great prognosis and the great news. So
I
yeah, that's
I
exciting.
just posted it on Facebook yesterday, and already there's like 60 comments or something underneath it with people that have either always wanted to meet him, or people that have been to his clinics, or people that just plain know him, and everybody's just over the moon about him being back.
Yeah, yeah. He is beloved. He, like yourself, he's a big part of this drum community. And yeah, it's great news. And he did tell me I'm going to have him on this podcast at some point when he's ready and up to it. So don't wear him down too much at the show. Maybe
Yeah.
right after that we'll have him come on.
Yeah.
And Rob, I wanted to just take a minute too. Just we sort of touched on Rebeats and the books,
Mhm.
and beside the Cymbal book that's kind of in the works and we might see in a couple of years, any other things that you're working on in the way of new publications coming out, or
Yeah, we over this last winter we did a revised edition of the Leady Drum Topics. That's all, what is it, 29 issues or whatever, with fresh scans and everything. Well, there were a lot of photocopies in the original editions, so that's more of an update. On the 30th of this month, we're releasing two updated and revised books by Rick Geyer, who does the serial number books. There's a
yes,
Ludwig dating guide by serial numbers, and a Gretch dating guide by serial numbers. And on the surface, for people that aren't familiar with the process, that would seem like a pretty straightforward thing. Like the drum company would start with the serial number 1 and go forward and keep notes of what they did and what's to find out. But Rick explains in almost excruciating detail at times the process of finding out what they did. And there are numbers that cycled over. They'd start over with a different badge, and there were different versions of the same badge that with slight differences, and quite often it involves going to secondary, not just a date that's stamped inside or a date where you can prove that it was purchased originally, but also the strainer, the muffler, and so on. So these revised editions have a lot more on those areas, the type of label that was inside. Like one example is on the Superphonic. For a while, it had a Ludaloy sticker inside, and several other stickers. And Rick went to the trouble of finding the metal company that did the plating, and got to the bottom of what a lot of those labels meant and when exactly they were used. And that all helps him in the chronological stream of serial numbers and pinning things down. So the new serial number books are going to be released on the 30th. Recently did a revised edition of Drum Colors.
yes, yep.
And what else? There's always something going on in the books, but we Franks for the Memories is back in print. GK, Brooks Tegler's wonderful book on Gene Krupa. There's a really long story behind that, but it's kind of a limited edition. We've got about 100 copies, but it's going to be hard to reprint when we get to the end of that group. So it's kind of a limited edition, but it's
Gotcha.
a pretty
Okay.
amazing book.
I'm gonna have to get one. I'm gonna have to get a copy before they're gone. And I just you have an amazing catalog here of for drum enthusiasts. I mean, it's amazing what you have available here. And this is one of my favorites. You know, Rick's book, as you were just saying, it's you know, helps kind of take a little bit of the mystery out of the Gretch
Yeah,
serial number
yeah.
mystery. We could spend a whole episode just talking about that. But yeah, look at this. And I have Chet's book, which is fantastic. Yeah. So yeah, I would encourage everybody to go onto Rob's website, Rebeats, and just take a look at all these books that are available. Yeah. Well, Rob, before we wrap it up for today, was there anything more we want to share about the show this year, the Chicago
Um,
show?
what else? For people that don't even know what happens at a drum show, if you go to chicagodrumshow.com and scroll around a little, you can find walkthroughs of previous shows. But basically, it started as a swap meet. It's the equivalent of running a VFW hall. We've got this county fair building, and we just split it up into 10 by 10 spaces, and all sorts of different people rent what we call it a booth. It's just a space actually, but we do have some pipe and drape separating them. But we get everything from collectors to vintage drum dealers to cymbal smiths, and then there are some, of course, some new drum companies. KHS is supporting us in a pretty big way this year. They got a Mapex and a Sonar booth. Yamaha, like I mentioned,
Wow,
is
yeah.
back. Ludwig always has a huge presence. WFL3, a lot of support from Hinsonberg and Trick and Maxwell Drums, but then a lot of individuals. And then the fun starts when they're jockeying for position, because it becomes neighborhoods. You know, like, and some of them are old neighborhoods. Everybody wants to be near Ludwig and Bunny Carlos and Randy Rainwater. They're always right across the aisle from Ludwig. And there's almost if you go down that first aisle on the other side of Randy and Bunny, then you see geez, everybody from blanking out on name, Joe Meckler to John Grant, and a lot of guys that are real icons in the collecting field, and it gives it a neighborhood feel. And then you go around the corner and you're in a different neighborhood, and it's still a nice neighborhood, but a whole different group of
Yeah, yeah,
people. And what's kind of funny is a lot of these people come and they see each other, and they don't do that much circulating. And sometimes I'll be talking to somebody that's been coming to the show for 20 years. And when I mention somebody else that's been exhibiting for 20 years, oh yeah, I think I know who that is. So it makes me feel less guilty for not knowing everybody as well as I feel like I really should. You know, I
yeah,
get more
yeah.
chance to talk to everybody during the year while we're working on it and on the phone than I actually do at the show.
I'm
And
sure it's like, yeah, you're hosting a party with, you know, hundreds of your best friends, and you know,
yeah,
it's tough to see everybody.
yeah, yeah.
I will say that when I went that year in 2019, I had just bought a vintage Rogers kit, and in fact, I'd had it in here up until just the other day. I'd moved it into my other room, but you know, I was using that kit for all my gigs, and I went over and I met Jeff Burke, who
Oh
is
yeah,
the Rogers guy,
yeah,
and I met the legendary Craig Cramp,
yeah.
who was there at that show, and what a super nice guy. And you know, we've stayed in touch since then. And so I mean, you know, like you say, Bunny Carlos is a fixture there, and um, you know, just to
Mike Corrado and Joe
Mike
Luoma
Corrado.
and man Lee Rupp. The list goes on of all these people that the you see the names all over, but a lot of these guys show up, and most of them have stories about some spectacular buys at past years or transactions that they had lined up. And you know,
Yeah,
and that happens with a lot of the really big transaction. You know, there'll be a Top Hat and Cane or a Billy Gladstone or something, and they don't want to ship it, so they bring it with them to Chicago to do the actual change and everything. It's
yeah.
always fun to start hearing some of the news that came out of the show. You know?
It's and I before I forget, if I'm not mistaken, you probably will remember this. That same year, I want to say Don McCauley. For anyone who doesn't know Don, Don is works for the Rolling Stones. He was Charlie's drum tech for the last 10 years. Charlie was with us. He's now Steve Jordan's tech. But Don, I think, had just come into possession of some Gene Krupa drums that I think someone had. Actually, I think Charlie had bought them and gave them to Don, and Don had them on display at the show that year,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
if I
I,
remember correctly. But
and yeah, and he came again in 2021 after the year that we missed. He was thinking for a while of putting on a show, the New England Drum Show, and I don't know if that's still going to happen or not. But the last time I saw Don, he was walking out with a hi-hat stand, and one of the exhibitors that actually I was standing there talking to at the time, David. I'm going to mispronounce his last name, Paradas. He had just sold Don that hi-hat, and it was a new old stock Gretch hi-hat that looked mint condition. And
wow,
Don was buying it for Charlie for his birthday. And
oh,
so David was just over the moon that he had just sold something that was actually going to Charlie.
yeah, yeah,
As was I a few years earlier. I had gotten a call from Don a number of years ago, and he had me ship an assortment of my books. I had 4 or 5 books to him, actually in England at the time, and it went into a little portable library that Charlie had on the road with him.
yeah.
I was
Oh,
really happy with that.
that's got to feel
Yeah.
really good. Yeah, knowing that you helped. And I'm sure Charlie appreciated it on the road because, as you've probably heard, that's exactly what he would want to do when he's traveling is, read books like that. He doesn't go out and it didn't go out and get into any, uh, you know, didn't mix around
Yeah.
with a lot of people out
No
there. So
hijinks, no touring,
yeah, no
no
hijinks. That's
Led
what I was
Zeppelin
trying to say.
stories.
Well, before I let you go, Rob, I mean, the vintage to me, what blew my mind when I went was the sheer number of vintage exhibitors and collectors that come to this show. And I'd heard it before, but until I actually saw it, I couldn't believe just row after row, aisle after aisle of vintage exhibits. And if you had to guess um, how many exhibitors you have there that deal in vintage drums. I mean, and it's all the top ones. When you go on eBay or Reverb, you see these people and they're at the show, right? I mean, it's all those companies.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Dealers.
the Drugan brothers have a huge presence, and of course
Yes.
Maxwell and
Yeah.
Rudy in the corner, but probably 30 or 40. I'm not sure how it breaks down. Altogether, there's 170, 180 spaces, and it's probably 60-40 between new and vintage, with 60 new, including all the drum head companies, cymbal companies, gifts, and so on. It's not all
Yep.
just drums. But so I got to be 30 or 40 that are just vintage.
Yeah. Yeah. I just remember going there and thinking that if you're a vintage drum collector and you're looking for something that you can't find anywhere, there's a really good chance you'll see it there.
Or
You know?
you'll get a line on it. I mean,
Yeah.
you put a bug in Mike Corrado's ear, and if it's something unusual and rare, and if he doesn't know where you can get it right now, you'll probably hear from him within 6 months that
Yeah.
he's come up with it, and a bunch of other guys too. The same with Bunny and Randy. I remember, I
It's
think Bunny's been at every show except one, and it was funny that year. Cheap Trick was touring in Canada with Aerosmith, and he just couldn't turn that down and for the drum show, but he was calling in every few hours. Randy kept reporting that Bunny had called to see what was new, because Randy always had his ear to the ground and knew what big transaction, what just walked in the door, what was in the consignment area, what big swap just went down, and So.
That's great. That is hilarious. I'll just a really quick, funny Mike Corrado story. So that while I was having dinner with Steve, Steve invited a bunch of people out to dinner on that Saturday night, and Mike I've known forever, and we're sitting across from each other at the table, and we were kind of chatting and reconnecting, and I mentioned that I'm looking for one of these gold Gretsch snare drums, and Mike, of course, says, "I have two of them," and which of course he does. If you know about Mike's snare drum
Yeah.
collection, and so I'm thinking, great, my old friend Mike is going to sell me one of his 24 karat gold plated Gretsch snares, and I said, do you want to sell me one of them? He said, well, no, I'm not looking to sell any, but I'm not. And then Steve overhears us and says, I think I know where I can get you one. Steve. And then the next day, I literally landed in Boston, had a voicemail from Steve saying, I spoke with Lee, and we're going to make this happen. Just give me another day or so. And a week or so later, there it was at my house. So
Yeah.
thank you, Steve.
Yeah. So you might
Yeah.
not find exactly what you're looking for, but you'll be hot on the trail anyhow. If you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, Rob, it's been such a pleasure having you here today, and I thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity, man.
Well, thanks, and thanks for all you do, man. I probably don't tell you that enough throughout the year, so I'll say it now, and I'll say it again before next Chicago Drum Show. Thanks for all you do.
Well, my pleasure. I'm very fortunate to have found a niche in this community without having the playing skills or chops to earn my way into it that way. I tried for years in college to get into a band. I just wasn't good enough. My left hand sucks. I'm not a good reader, but I'm passionate about gear and percussion and drumming, and I'm fortunate to have carved out a niche. My good fortune is not lost on me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, that's great. And I was just going to say, it sounds very familiar. So there's hope for me still. So good to know that. All those things. In my case, a weak right hand and a bad reader. But thank you so much, Rob. A pleasure. Congratulations. Good luck with the show this year. And I'll be seeing you real soon. Everybody, thanks for watching today. Big hand for Rob Cook. And I'll post the link to the Chicago Drum Show and information for people to check it out too. And Rebeats.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for watching the show, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next episode of Live from My Drum Room with John DeChristopher.